John Harper had always prided himself on being reliable. For 38 years, he had worked at the same company, first as a junior employee, then slowly rising to the status of senior analyst. To many, he was the quiet, dependable man behind the scenes. He had seen the company grow from a small startup into an industry leader. He'd lived through ups and downs, but always with the same unwavering commitment. However, nothing could have prepared him for the gut-wrenching moment that would change everything. It was a Thursday morning, much like any other, when John walked into the CEO's office, expecting a simple update on a recent project. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting soft shadows across the polished conference table. The CEO, Michael Rowe, sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. The air was thick with a strange tension. "Sit down, John," Michael said with a wave of his hand, his voice strangely cold. "We need to talk." John, always the professional, took a seat across from him, his heart already beginning to race. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The CEO had always been cordial, even when business decisions had to be made. But today, there was an air of finality about him. "John, we've been reviewing your performance over the last few months," Michael began, his voice oddly detached. "And frankly, it's not what it used to be. The pace of change in this industry is relentless, and we need to stay ahead. You've been here a long time, but the truth is, your skills are starting to fall behind." John blinked, unable to fully comprehend the words. He had always given his best. He had spent countless nights working late, sacrificing weekends with his family for the success of the company. It wasn't just a job to him, it was a part of who he was. He could feel the weight of the words settling in, like a lead ball in his chest. "Are you firing me?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was trying to stay calm, trying not to let the emotion seep through. Michael's face remained impassive. "I'm afraid so, John. It's a tough decision, but it's the right one for the company." John's mind spun. He couldn't focus on the words anymore. It was as if his entire world had just tilted on its axis. Fired. After all these years, it ended like this. "Is there anything I can do? I can adjust, I can learn." John's voice cracked slightly, betraying the panic he was trying to suppress. Michael shook his head. "I'm sorry, John. It's already been decided. You'll receive your severance package, and the HR department will assist with your transition. I wish you the best, truly." John's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger. He didn't know how to process the sudden shock. He stood up from the chair, his body numb, his vision narrowing. The only thing he could hear now was the faint buzzing of the overhead lights. As he walked out of the office, the walls seemed to close in around him. He needed air. He needed space to breathe. His hands shook as he reached for the elevator, the floor number slowly ticking upward, each moment dragging longer than the last. John was in a daze, unsure of where to go next. He was heading towards the exit when something caught his eye, something strange. The old filing cabinet in the corner of the office, long ignored, seemed to be staring at him. Covered in dust, its once bright metal surface was now dulled by years of neglect. It was tucked away against the wall as if someone had intentionally shoved it out of sight. Something about that cabinet seemed off. He had passed it dozens of times, never giving it much thought. But today, something was different. Maybe it was the shock of being fired. Maybe it was his mind searching for anything to distract him from the crushing reality he now faced. But the more he looked at the cabinet, the more it seemed to call to him. Without thinking, John found himself walking toward it. He barely registered his footsteps as they echoed in the empty hallway. His pulse raced. What was he doing? He stood in front of the cabinet for a moment, unsure of why he was even there. It wasn't like him to act on impulse. He had always been the type to follow the rules, to take the well-trodden path. But today, the rules didn't matter. He felt an almost irresistible pull, as if something deep inside him was urging him to open that cabinet. His fingers grazed the cold metal handle. The moment he touched it, a chill ran through his spine. It wasn't just the old metal that sent shivers down his back, it was the feeling that something hidden, something dangerous, was waiting for him inside. He pulled open the drawer. At first, it just seemed like old paperwork, files that no one had bothered to look at in years. Dusty memos, financial statements long forgotten. But then something caught his eye. A stack of documents, different from the others. The edges were yellowed with age, and they had a weight to them, like they were more than just old paper. John hesitated, his fingers hovering above the stack. Should he look? Should he just walk away and forget about it? But the curiosity was too strong. He needed to know what was hidden here, what had been deliberately tucked away from the eyes of others. He pulled the stack out of the drawer, holding it in his hands as if it might crumble at any moment. The first document was a letter, typed in a formal, crisp font. As he read the words, his stomach twisted. This project is far more significant than anyone realizes. You must stay silent. The consequences of revealing what's inside these files will be disastrous. John's breath caught in his throat. What was this? The words felt like a warning, but from who? And why had no one ever mentioned this before? The documents weren't just mundane company records. They contained names John didn't recognize. And cryptic references to locations, dates, and events that seemed utterly out of place. His heart raced as he flipped through the pages, each one revealing more pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite understand. Suddenly, the door to the office behind him creaked open. John's head snapped up. His heart stopped for a moment. Had someone seen him? He shoved the papers back into the drawer in a panic, just as Michael Rowe's assistant appeared in the doorway. "John, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. He forced a smile, but it felt stiff, unnatural. "Yeah. Just gathering my things." The assistant nodded, but John could see the concern in her eyes. She didn't know what had just happened. She couldn't know. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice soft. John nodded, and as he turned to leave, a thought gnawed at him. He hadn't imagined it. He had to find out more. This wasn't just about being fired. Something much bigger was going on. And the letter, those cryptic words, had only scratched the surface. As John stepped into the elevator, his mind raced. What had he just discovered? What did it mean? The feeling of dread still hung heavy in the pit of his stomach, but it was joined by another, stronger emotion, determination. He would find out the truth. John sat in his car, the engine idling in the empty parking lot, as his fingers gripped the envelope of papers he had taken from the office. His heart raced, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. The events of the day, the firing, the discovery, had left him with more questions than answers. He had hoped for a quiet retirement, a smooth transition out of the corporate world, but now, it seemed as though his world had been flipped upside down. The more he thought about it, the more he felt certain that he couldn't just let it go. The documents he had found weren't random. They were important. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide them, to keep them buried in that old filing cabinet. But why? And what did they mean? He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the envelope in his hands. The streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot, their glow reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. He had no idea where to start, but he knew one thing for sure: he needed to find out more. This wasn't just about his firing. This was about something bigger, something that could change everything. John carefully opened the envelope, the brittle edges of the papers crinkling under his fingertips. His hands were slightly trembling as he unfolded the first page. The letter he had read earlier was the beginning, but there was more. Much more. The first document was a memo dated 5 years ago, typed in a familiar, corporate font. The ink had faded, but it was still legible. John scanned the words, his brow furrowing as he took in the contents. This project is far more significant than anyone realizes. The higher-ups believe we have time, but we do not. The information we are dealing with is dangerous, and it must stay hidden at all costs. Do not speak to anyone about this. Do not leave a trace. If you are found out, the consequences will be severe. Trust no one. The files are to be stored in the safest location possible. They will remain there until further notice. John's mind spun as he processed the words. What project? What information? And why was it so dangerous? He had worked at the company for nearly 4 decades, and never once had he heard anything about a secret project. The phrase, the higher-ups, lingered in his mind. Who were they, and why were they so determined to keep this hidden? He turned the page, eager to find more answers. The next document was a series of handwritten notes. The handwriting was erratic, almost frantic, as though the writer had been in a hurry. John's eyes skimmed the words. They think they can control it, but they can't. It's already too far gone. The research they've been funding, no one can know about it. It's not just about the company. It's about something much bigger. The discovery could change everything, but if it falls into the wrong hands. John's stomach clenched as he read on. The note spoke of something that could change everything. But what was it? His mind raced, but the more he read, the more the mystery deepened. He flipped through several more pages, each one revealing more about the hidden project. There were references to experiments, to research, to individuals whose names he didn't recognize. But one name stood out to him, a name he had heard before. Dr. Evelyn Turner. Dr. Turner was a name John had heard whispered around the office in the past. She was a top scientist, someone who had been working in the background for years on something called Project Nexus. John hadn't thought much about it at the time. The company had a lot of departments, and not all of them were directly related to his work. But now, seeing her name on these documents, he felt a jolt of recognition. Dr. Turner has been the driving force behind Project Nexus. She believes she's on the verge of something groundbreaking. But there are risks involved. We can't let her succeed, at least, not yet. John's pulse quickened. He didn't know much about Dr. Turner, but he knew one thing: she was someone who had been working in the shadows. And if her project was as significant as these papers suggested, it was possible that she knew something that no one else did. What had Dr. Turner been researching? And why was the company so intent on keeping it a secret? The more John read, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the world he had been a part of for so long. As the night deepened, John found himself lost in the documents. The more he uncovered, the more questions emerged. There were mentions of covert meetings, of exchanges with individuals from other countries, and of a technology that could revolutionize the world, or destroy it. He felt as though he had stumbled onto a treasure trove of dangerous secrets. But what was he supposed to do with them? Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his concentration. John jumped, startled by the noise in the quiet car. He glanced at the screen. It was a text message from his daughter, Emily. "Dad, are you okay? I know things have been tough with the job, but I'm here for you. Please call me when you can. Love you." John's heart softened as he read the message. He had always been a distant father, caught up in his work, but Emily had always been there for him. She had grown up with a single father, and he hadn't always been the most present parent. But now, more than ever, he needed her. The weight of the documents, the mystery, and the uncertainty of what he had uncovered was starting to take its toll. He quickly typed back a reply. "I'm fine, Emily. Just trying to figure some things out. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" He put the phone down, rubbing his eyes. He was exhausted, mentally and physically. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. He needed to know what these files meant, and he needed to find out why they had been hidden away for so long. Suddenly, the thought struck him, what if someone was looking for these files? John sat up straighter in his car. What if he wasn't the only one who had stumbled upon the truth? He quickly stuffed the documents back into the envelope, his mind racing. He had to be careful. If the company was willing to go to such lengths to hide this information, there was no telling what they might do if they realized someone had found it. He had to be smart. He had to be strategic. The next morning, John drove to his small apartment, the weight of the envelope heavy on his passenger seat. He couldn't let anyone know about the documents yet, not until he knew more. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his closest friends. If this project was as dangerous as the papers suggested, then he was in over his head. As he pulled into the parking lot of his building, his phone rang. The caller ID read, Michael Rowe. John hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He had no intention of speaking to the man who had fired him, but a part of him knew he couldn't ignore the call. With a deep breath, he answered. Hello? John, Michael's voice came through the phone, sounding surprisingly cordial. I just wanted to check in on you. I know this must be a tough time, but I wanted to remind you about your severance package and the benefits we've arranged for you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. John's mind raced. Was this a genuine gesture of goodwill, or was Michael trying to keep him from digging deeper into something he shouldn't? I appreciate it, John said, trying to sound calm. But I'm fine. Just need some time to figure things out. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Of course, Michael replied, his voice a little too smooth. I understand. But remember, John, we're all just doing what we think is best for the company. It's not personal. I hope you can understand that. The words hit John like a punch to the gut. We're all just doing what we think is best for the company. It was a subtle reminder that the company came first. He was just a cog in the machine. But this time, John wasn't going to be pushed aside. He wasn't just going to forget about the secrets he had uncovered. John woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was just before dawn, and the gray light of morning filtered through the blinds. He rubbed his eyes, still feeling the weight of the documents in his mind. The discovery of the secret project had consumed him, but now, it seemed that the more he uncovered, the deeper the hole he was digging himself into. The phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the screen. The message was from Emily. Dad, please call me when you get this. I'm worried. There's something weird going on with the company. Are you okay? John's stomach lurched. He hadn't mentioned anything about the documents or the strange events surrounding his firing. He hadn't wanted to involve her. But now, his daughter had somehow sensed that something was off. How much did she know? How could she possibly be aware of anything? He quickly typed back a response, his hands shaking. I'm fine, Emily. Just a bit stressed out. Don't worry, I'll explain everything soon. I love you. But even as he sent the message, he knew it wasn't true. He wasn't fine. He was anything but fine. The discovery he had made the day before wasn't something he could easily shake off. The more he thought about the papers, the more he realized just how deep the web went. It wasn't just about Project Nexus anymore. It was about everything, the company, the people, the lies. And now, Emily's text added a new layer of danger. If she was involved in any way, if she had stumbled upon something, then there was no turning back. John pushed the thought away. He needed to focus. He couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He grabbed the envelope and began sifting through the pages again, as if they held the answers to everything. The documents were becoming increasingly disturbing. There were more notes from Dr. Evelyn Turner, more references to secret meetings and untraceable transactions. But it wasn't just the research that was troubling, it was the people involved. The higher-ups were more powerful than he had imagined, and they were willing to go to great lengths to keep everything under wraps. He stopped at a particular sheet, a photocopy of a report from a private security firm. The name at the top caught his eye, Hargrave and Company. The firm's logo was stamped at the bottom of the page, a stylized H with a jagged edge that looked almost menacing. The document outlined a series of surveillance activities, wiretaps, shadowing key employees, and tracking their movements. The firm had been hired to monitor the progress of certain individuals within the company. And John had been one of them. He had no idea at the time, but apparently, he had been under surveillance for years. Subject: John Harper. Actions noted: increased presence in high-level meetings. Potential risk to security. Immediate action required. John's blood ran cold as he read the words. They had been watching him. The very people he had trusted. His thoughts scrambled as he tried to understand why. Was it because of his work? Or was it something else? Had they known about his curiosity? Had they seen him as a potential threat all along? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. John jumped, his heart thudding in his chest. He hadn't been expecting anyone. It was too early, and the building was quiet. He quickly stuffed the documents back into the envelope and hid it under his bed. Another knock. This time, more insistent. John cautiously walked toward the door, his nerves fraying. Who could it be at this hour? When he opened the door, he was met with the last person he expected, his old friend and former colleague, David Collins. David was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a confident, yet friendly demeanor. He had been one of John's closest friends during their years at the company. The two of them had shared countless late nights working on projects together, laughing over coffee breaks, and commiserating over corporate politics. But that was before John was let go. He hadn't seen David in weeks. "John," David said, his voice strained, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. "We need to talk. Now." John's mind raced. What was going on? Why was David here, looking so unsettled? And why was he so secretive? "David, what's going on?" John asked, stepping aside to let him in. David walked into the apartment, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the curtains. "We don't have much time." "They're on to you, John." John's stomach twisted. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from David confirmed his worst fears. "What do you mean? Who's on to me?" David took a deep breath, his eyes hardening. "The company. The higher-ups. They know you found something. They know you've seen the files. And now they're looking for you." John's heart skipped a beat. But how? How could they know? David's expression was grim. "You don't understand, John. This goes far beyond anything you've imagined. The people at the top are ruthless. They'll do anything to protect their secrets. You've stumbled into something much bigger than you think. And now they're trying to cover their tracks." John felt a chill spread through him. His mind raced, processing the information. It made sense, in a twisted way. The surveillance. The secrecy. The project. It was all connected. But he had no idea how deep the conspiracy ran, or who could be trusted. "What do I do?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. David hesitated for a moment, looking conflicted. "You need to get out of here. Now. They'll come for you, and they won't stop until they've found you. You've got to leave the city, at least for a little while. Lay low." John's mind was spinning. He had thought about leaving, but he never imagined it would come to this. He had never been a man to run from his problems. But now, it seemed that staying put was a dangerous option. If the company was as powerful as David was suggesting, then he was no longer in control of his own fate. David's voice broke through his thoughts. "John, I'm serious. I know you're not a coward, but you have to understand something. They'll come after your family too, if they think it'll make you talk. You need to protect them." John's heart sank. Emily. He had already put her in danger by reaching out to her. He had tried to keep her safe, but now, his involvement in this mess could hurt her too. "I can't just leave, David. What about the files? What about what I've found?" John's voice cracked with frustration. David took a step forward, his eyes intense. "The files are nothing. They're just pieces of a puzzle, John. The bigger picture is much more dangerous. You're in the middle of something that could unravel everything. I don't even know the full extent of it. But I know that if you don't leave, it's not just your life that will be in danger. It's everyone you care about." John felt a lump form in his throat. He had never been one to run from a fight, but the stakes had changed. The lines between right and wrong, friend and foe, were no longer clear. He had to make a decision. Stay and face the unknown dangers head-on, or leave everything behind to protect his family, and himself. He didn't have long to think. David's voice shook him from his reverie. "John, please. You need to go. Now. You can't trust anyone at the company. Not anymore. I've been talking to people on the inside. They're already trying to cover up what you found. And if you stay, they'll find a way to make sure it disappears. Forever." John took a deep breath, his thoughts racing. He looked at David, then back at the envelope of documents under his bed. His whole life had been turned upside down in the span of a single day. But now, the choice was clear. He had no choice but to leave. With a heavy heart, John nodded. "Okay. I'll go. But I need to take something with me." David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you pack. But we need to move fast." As the two men began gathering John's things, a sense of finality settled over John. There was no going back. The life he had known, his career, his security, was gone. But the deeper he delved into the mystery, the more he realized that he was now part of something much bigger. Something that could change the world. And the only way to find the answers was to keep moving forward. The morning was damp, with a thick fog blanketing the city as John and David hurried through the narrow alley behind John's apartment. The air felt heavy. As though the city itself was holding its breath. John's heart was pounding in his chest, each beat like a drum echoing in his ears, drowning out the sound of the distant traffic. He wasn't used to running, especially not from something this big, this dangerous. But every instinct told him that he had no other choice. David was ahead of him, his tall frame moving swiftly through the mist, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. John could barely keep up, his mind racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The files, the discovery, the warning from David. He felt as though the ground was slipping out from under him, and he couldn't stop it. His whole world had been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. David led him to an old black sedan parked a few blocks away, its engine running. The windows were tinted, offering them some semblance of privacy. As soon as they got inside, the door shut with a thud that seemed to echo louder than it should. The car smelled faintly of leather and something metallic. It was a car designed for quick escapes. "We've got to move fast," David said, his voice tight. "I've arranged a place for you to lay low for a while, but it's not going to be comfortable. The people who are after you, they've got eyes everywhere." John barely registered the words. His mind kept flashing back to the moment he'd made the decision to leave everything behind, his home, his daughter, his life as he knew it. Emily's face had been the hardest part. The thought of her getting involved in this mess weighed heavily on him. He had to protect her, but how could he when everything seemed to be spiraling out of control? As the car sped through the empty streets, the city slowly fading into the distance, David spoke again, this time with more urgency in his voice. "John, you need to understand something. This goes way beyond just a few files or some corporate secrets. What you've stumbled onto is much bigger. There's a reason they're after you, and it's not because of the files you've seen. It's because you're the key to something they've been trying to bury for years." John glanced over at David, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean? What do they want from me?" David's hands gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. "I don't know all the details, but I've heard things. Whispers. The project you uncovered, Project Nexus, it's not just some research experiment. It's a weapon. And whoever controls it controls everything." John's blood ran cold at the word weapon. For a moment, he thought he might have heard wrong. But David's face, the grim set of his jaw, told him it wasn't a mistake. "I don't understand," John muttered, more to himself than to David. "A weapon? How could something like this be connected to the company? They're supposed to be a tech firm, not some kind of defense contractor." David's gaze remained fixed on the road, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "It's not about defense. It's about control. The technology that Dr. Turner has been working on, it's not just for surveillance or manipulation. It's much darker. Think about it, John. If you could control people's minds, if you could rewrite their memories, their behavior, what kind of power would that give you? You could change the world in ways no one could imagine." John felt the blood drain from his face. He was starting to piece it together, but the realization hit him with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of him. This wasn't just a corporate conspiracy. This was something more sinister. Something that could potentially destroy everything he thought he knew about reality itself. "Control people's minds," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Are you telling me this is some kind of mind control project?" David nodded slowly. "It's worse than that. Dar. Turner and the team have developed a system, a kind of neural network, that can access and influence human cognition on a massive scale. It's still in the experimental phase, but they've made breakthroughs, dangerous ones. They've already tested it in small-scale trials. But now, they want to expand it. They want to make it a tool for complete global control. And the people behind this, they're not just interested in money or power. They want to reshape society in their image. They think they can do it. And they're willing to kill anyone who gets in their way." John's mind reeled. This was beyond anything he could have ever imagined. He had always thought of his work as just that, work. But now, the reality of what was happening was sinking in. The technology, the experiments, the secrecy. It was all tied together in a web of manipulation and control. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how little he actually understood. David continued, his voice low, as if speaking in hushed tones about a dangerous secret. "You were never meant to find out, John. You weren't supposed to see the files, the memos. But you did. And now you're a threat to them. That's why they've been watching you. That's why they fired you. They're trying to silence you. They think if they take you out of the picture, the whole thing will go away. But they're wrong. It won't. You're the key to exposing everything." John felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "So, what now? What do I do? How do I stop this?" David's eyes met his, dark and heavy with meaning. "You can't stop it. Not alone. But you can expose it. You can go public with what you've found. If enough people know the truth, maybe we can bring them down. But it's going to be dangerous. They've already killed to protect their secrets. And they'll do it again if they have to." A chill ran down John's spine as the weight of David's words settled in. He had already crossed a line. There was no going back. His life, his future, it was all on the line now. But the real question was, could he expose this conspiracy? Could he tear down the walls of secrecy and corruption? Even if it meant putting everything he cared about at risk? David seemed to sense John's uncertainty. Listen, I know you're scared. I am too. But we don't have any other choice. If we stay silent, if we let them win, then we're complicit. This is bigger than us, bigger than the company. We're talking about something that could change the course of history. We can't let them get away with it. John nodded slowly, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had always been someone who played by the rules, someone who followed orders and kept his head down. But now, he was being forced to confront a truth he had never expected, a truth that could shatter everything he had believed in. As the car sped through the foggy morning, John knew there was no turning back. He was in too deep now. But the question still gnawed at him, could he do it? Could he bring the people behind Project Nexus to justice before it was too late? The car slowed, turning off the main road and into a more secluded area. David stopped the car in front of a small, nondescript building hidden between two old warehouses. It looked abandoned, its windows dark, its walls covered in grime. But John could tell it wasn't an ordinary building. This was the place David had mentioned, the place where he would lay low for a while. This is it, David said, unlocking the door and stepping out of the car. Come on. We don't have much time. John followed him, his legs heavy as he walked toward the building. His mind was still reeling, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. But as he stepped inside the dimly lit building, something inside him shifted. This was it. The moment he had been dreading and anticipating all at once. There was no more running. No more hiding. The battle for truth had begun. John sat at the old, rickety table inside the abandoned building, the flickering light above casting harsh shadows across the room. The building smelled of damp wood and decay. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath him. He felt trapped, his mind racing with thoughts that he couldn't shake. Every corner of the room seemed to whisper secrets, and yet the answers he needed remained just out of reach. He looked over at David, who was pacing back and forth, his face tense with worry. The plan they had discussed, exposing the truth behind Project Nexus, seemed impossible now. The more John learned, the more dangerous the situation became. David had warned him, but he had no idea just how deep the conspiracy ran. He had thought the company was just a corrupt business. He had thought the worst-case scenario was getting fired, but this? This was a nightmare beyond his worst fears. We need to move fast, David said, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse, a sign of exhaustion that John had come to recognize. The people behind this aren't just going to sit back and wait for us to act. We're being watched. Every move we make is being tracked. John nodded, though he didn't feel any sense of control. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. How had it come to this? How had his life, his work, turned into something so dangerous? He had been just an employee. A loyal worker. Now, he was being hunted by the very company he had spent years building his career with. David had led him to this place, a rundown safe house that had once been used by the underground network of whistleblowers and activists who fought against corporate corruption. It was the only place where they could lay low, at least for now. But John knew that wouldn't last. The longer they stayed, the more likely it was that someone would find them. We have to contact the press, John said finally, breaking the oppressive silence. His voice was rough, uncertain. He had no idea how to proceed, but he knew one thing: if they didn't expose this, no one would ever know the truth. David's face hardened, and for a moment, John could see the weight of his words sinking in. We can't just go to the press, John. They've got the media under control. Anyone who speaks out against them, anyone who tries to expose the truth, disappears. We need to be smarter than that. We need to find a way to get the information out without alerting them. John felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The weight of David's words hung heavy in the air. The people behind Project Nexus were powerful. They had the resources to manipulate entire systems, to cover up anything that threatened to reveal the truth. It wasn't just about mind control or surveillance, it was about erasing people, erasing entire histories. They had been operating in the shadows for years, and now they were about to do whatever it took to keep it that way. But how do we expose them without putting ourselves in danger? John asked, his voice tinged with desperation. David stopped pacing and turned to look at him. There was something in his eyes, something deep, something that John couldn't quite place. For a moment, David looked as though he were holding back something. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. I've been working on a plan. I've been gathering allies. People who are still on the inside. People who know about Project Nexus and want to stop it. But it's risky. The more people who know, the more we put ourselves at risk. John felt a cold knot form in his stomach. What do you mean, allies? Who are these people? David leaned in, his eyes scanning the room to make sure no one was listening. They're people who used to work for the company. People who've seen the dark side of what's going on. They're not just employees, they're former agents, researchers, engineers. People who can help us take down the whole operation. But they're in hiding too. They're afraid of being found, of being silenced. John listened intently, trying to absorb the enormity of the situation. If David was right, then they weren't alone in this fight. There were others who wanted to expose the truth. But how could they trust them? How could they be sure that these allies weren't just another part of the web, sent to mislead them or trap them? How do we contact them? John asked, the urgency in his voice clear. David hesitated for a moment. There's a safe house in the city. It's an old apartment building, marked by a red X on the door. If we can make contact with them, we'll be able to form a plan. But the window is small. We need to move quickly. John nodded, his heart racing again. He wasn't sure who they could trust, but one thing was clear, they couldn't do this alone. They needed help. They needed allies who could help them bring down the people who had turned their lives upside down. David grabbed his jacket from a chair and tossed it to John. We need to go now. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in. John stood up, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This was it, the point of no return. Once they left this safe house, there would be no turning back. They would be entering the heart of the conspiracy, and the risks would only grow from here. The two men stepped out of the building and into the damp morning air. John's mind raced as they made their way down the empty street. He tried to keep his focus, but it was hard. His thoughts kept drifting to Emily, his daughter. Had she received his last message? Was she safe? He couldn't shake the fear that something would happen to her if he didn't find a way to end this. David led him through narrow alleys, keeping to the shadows, and avoiding the main roads. The city had never felt more dangerous. It wasn't just the unknown dangers lurking in the dark corners of the streets, it was the weight of the conspiracy that seemed to stretch out in every direction, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the city, every institution. No one was safe. No one could be trusted. As they neared the building David had mentioned, the tension in the air seemed to thicken. The red X painted on the door stood out starkly against the grayness of the surroundings. It looked like any other old apartment building, but to John, it was a lifeline. A chance at finding the truth. David knocked on the door 3 times, quick and sharp. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and dark, intelligent eyes. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "David," she said in a quiet voice. I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk, David said, stepping inside. John followed him into the building, the smell of stale air filling his nostrils. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few flickering bulbs. They made their way to a small apartment at the end of the hall, where a man was waiting for them. He looked up as they entered, his face hard and weathered. "This is John," David said, gesturing to John. "He's the one who uncovered Project Nexus. We need your help." The man's eyes widened at the mention of the project, but he didn't speak immediately. He studied John for a long moment, as if trying to assess whether he could be trusted. Finally, he spoke. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" John swallowed hard. He had no answer. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how deep this went or how dangerous it truly was. All he knew was that he couldn't turn back. He had to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension as John and David sat across from their newly found allies in the dimly lit apartment. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, the air heavy with the musty smell of stale paper and old wood. The woman, Lena, and the man, Michael, were now looking at John with a mixture of skepticism and something else, something John couldn't quite place. "You're telling me you uncovered Project Nexus?" Michael's voice was low, his tone tinged with disbelief. His face, hardened by years of hiding in the shadows, was unreadable. John nodded. "Yes. I didn't know what I was getting into. But now I know it's bigger than just a few corrupt people at a tech company. They're working on something that could change everything. The files, the research, they were just the tip of the iceberg." Lena leaned forward, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "How much do you know? How deep have you gone into it?" David interjected before John could answer. "He knows enough to be a threat to them. That's why we're here, why we're talking to you. We need your help to take them down." Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We've heard whispers about this project for years. It's why we've been in hiding. But what you're telling me, if it's true, then this isn't just about corporate greed or political power. This is something else entirely. This is about controlling the very fabric of reality." John's stomach twisted at the implications of Michael's words. Control the fabric of reality? It was a statement that seemed almost too far-fetched to be true, but John had seen enough to understand that nothing about Project Nexus was ordinary. It was beyond anything he could have imagined when he first opened those files. "Look," Lena said, her voice cutting through the tension, "we're all in this together now. But there's something you need to understand, you don't get to just expose them. If you try to go public with this, they'll bury you. You won't even make it out of the city alive. They have resources, connections, and people planted everywhere." John clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. "So, what do we do then? Just sit here, hide, and hope they don't find us?" Lena's eyes softened slightly, though her expression remained grim. "No. We expose them the right way. But we need to be smart about it. If we make the wrong move, if we give them even the smallest opening, they'll wipe us all off the map. And if we fail, everything we've uncovered, everything we've learned, will be buried forever." A silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed the gravity of Lena's words. The stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. The people behind Project Nexus weren't just going to sit idly by while their secrets were exposed. They would do anything to keep it hidden, no matter the cost. David was the first to break the silence. "We need to get the information to the right people. We need to find a way to leak everything at once, take down their infrastructure, their finances, their research. We hit them hard, and we do it quickly." "But how?" John asked, his voice filled with frustration. "We're just a handful of people. We don't have the resources they do. We can't just waltz into their headquarters and take everything down. Michael spoke, his voice calm and steady, despite the chaos unfolding around them. We don't have to go in. We've got connections, people who are already inside. They've been feeding us intel for years, trying to stay ahead of the game. We've been gathering pieces of the puzzle, but it's never been enough to make a move. John felt a glimmer of hope. So, we have an inside track. How does that help us? Lena looked at John, her eyes hardening. It helps us because we can use their own system against them. We can leak the information to the right people, journalists, activists, lawmakers, people who can spread the truth faster than they can suppress it. If we hit them on all fronts, they won't be able to stop it. Not without exposing themselves. John's mind was racing. He had been hoping for a solution, a way to fight back, but this was more complicated than anything he had imagined. He had to trust these people, trust their plan, but every step they took felt like they were stepping deeper into the lion's den. David stood up abruptly, pacing the room again, his face tense. We can't waste time. We need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to track us down, to silence us. If we don't move quickly, we're done. John stood up as well, his hands shaking. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send him plummeting into the unknown. But he couldn't back down now. He had seen too much. Too many people's lives were at stake. He couldn't just let it all slide away. We'll do it, John said, his voice firm, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. We'll expose them. We'll take down Project Nexus. Lena and Michael exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Michael spoke. You're sure about this? Once we start this, there's no going back. It's not just your life on the line, it's everyone's who's been working to expose them. And we can't guarantee that everyone will make it out alive. John's jaw clenched. He didn't have the luxury of second thoughts. I'm sure. We have to do this. David nodded, as if he had been waiting for John to say those words. Then we're all in this together. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Lena and Michael had a network of safehouses and contacts who would help them execute the plan. They moved quickly, gathering the evidence they needed, documents, encrypted files, photographs, and witness testimonies. Everything had to be compiled and ready to be distributed in a way that couldn't be traced back to them. John felt the weight of the situation settling deeper into his chest. They were about to set a fire that would burn everything in its path. The people behind Project Nexus wouldn't go down quietly. They would fight back, and John knew it wouldn't be pretty. As the night grew darker, the tension in the room mounted. Everyone worked silently, focused on the task at hand. There was no room for hesitation. No room for mistakes. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The moment they would take down one of the most dangerous, far-reaching conspiracies in modern history. When everything was ready, they made their move. They set up the encrypted communications. They had arranged for the information to be sent to trusted journalists, political figures, and human rights organizations. They even managed to get the attention of a few whistleblowers inside government agencies. The files were about to be scattered across the globe, and there was nothing Project Nexus could do to stop it. John sat at the desk, watching as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to press, send, and unleash the truth to the world. He took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment of no return. Do it, David said, his voice a whisper of urgency. We're ready. John's finger hit the key. The screen blinked, and the information began to upload. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The world felt like it was holding its breath. And then, with a single click, the truth was out. The immediate aftermath was a blur. The city erupted in chaos as the first reports came in. News outlets scrambled to confirm the details. The files, the research, the documents detailing the mind control technology, everything was out in the open. John felt a strange sense of relief. The fight wasn't over, but the first battle had been won. The truth was no longer a secret. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, a cold realization settled over him: Project Nexus wasn't finished. They would come after him. They would come after everyone involved. The battle for the truth was only just beginning.